And then Wednesday night, sleep.
Can you repeat yourself? We can't hear you.
Sure. Wednesday morning, children. And then at 3 o'clock, osteoporosis. And then at 6 o'clock, sleep. Thursday morning, we're going to talk about food, the acid-alkaline balance in the body and its relationship to arthritis. And then at 3 o'clock, it's one of my favourite lectures. It's called Fantastic Fats. And then in the evening, 6 o'clock, skin. And then Friday morning, respiratory. And then Friday in the afternoon, activity is life. And I thought for Friday evening, I might talk about how I got into this and how I got this information into my brain and the experiences I went through, which I believe God designed because I'm naturally very quiet and shy and would never choose to do this. And then on Saturday, every lecture will be on the mind. So I'll be talking about different aspects of mind health, healing the mind and rewiring the brain. And there will be a 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it will be from 2 to 3 because I must catch a plane that evening to go to Minneapolis.
What time are you done on Saturday?
Be 2 to 3.
2 to 3. And what is it? 2 to 3 one? Yes.
Pardon?
What will the 2 to 3 one be? Do we know?
I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
But we know what tonight's meeting's on, don't we? The gastrointestinal tract. It's an amazing process that breaks the food down on our plate to microscopic little substances that's then absorbed into our blood. Our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube, and anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances and gets absorbed into the blood. Then it becomes part of you and me. A lady said to me, I'm worried about my little boy. He's got a cold and he keeps snorting and swallowing. And now it's going into his body. I said, it's actually not going into his body. It's just going to come out the other end. Because anything that goes into that gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me till it gets broken down to tiny substances and then absorbed into the body. Then it becomes part of you or me. So let us begin, and we begin at the mouth. And the mouth is the only part of the whole of the gastrointestinal tract which is about 10 yards long. It's the only part of the gastrointestinal tract that we have say over. We have say over what goes in. We have say over whether it's a lovely meal like I had at lunchtime, which was lentil stew with a bit of brown rice and some celery and cucumber and tomatoes and radish. We have say over what goes in. We have say over how much goes in. Whether it's 10 platefuls or 2 platefuls, and I have to admit I did have seconds on the lentils. I love my protein. So we have say over what goes in. We have say over how much goes in. We have say over how often it goes in. Does it go in every 2 hours, or does it go in twice a day or 3 times a day? Does it go in with a break between it? Isn't that what we have say over? And we have say over, number 4, how long it's in the mouth. Chew, chew, swallow, or chew, chew, chew until it's almost to a milk. And Dr. Kellogg, famous doctor who wrote many books on health in the mid-late 1800s, he said, if you eat a nut and you chew it too fast, so you don't chew it down to tiny particle, that little lump will come out the other end, and you didn't accept the nutrients that are in that nut. You've probably heard the old saying, we should chew our drinks and drink our food. And we say to our guests when they're on the detox, that take a mouthful of the juice and chew it. Mix it with your saliva, warm it a little bit, and then swallow that mouthful. And any drinks we have, it's good to just keep it in the mouth for a minute. It'll help to bring it to the temperature of the stomach. And we should drink our foods, meaning we should chew our food till it's almost a cream. Now there's another reason why the food should be in the mouth a little longer, and that is that when you chew it very, very well, you break it down to tiny particles, which makes a larger surface area for the enzymes to work on. And it also is giving messages to your brain. Oh yeah, there's a bit of fat coming. Oh yeah, there's a bit of protein coming. And then it contacts the organs down below, which we will see which ones are breaking it down. That's a little 2-year-old jumping. And you probably notice that I do not mind the sounds of the children, hey? Because isn't it the mothers we want to reach who are raising tomorrow's generation? And if the little one's particularly loud, it's all right, I'll repeat it. And if you need to hear it again, please ask me to repeat it. But mothers, we love the sounds of your babies. So chewing is very important because there are no teeth anywhere else. Isn't that true? The only part that you can chew is when it is in your mouth. And we're such a fast society today that many people don't chew properly. And there's another reason why people don't chew properly, is because when they're babies, they're given slop. Sorry, I don't know what else to call it. Got that? Slop. Do you know the first foods that we give our little ones should be hard foods? Piece of celery, piece of cucumber, piece of apple. Won't they choke? No, they'll gag. There's a big difference between gagging and choking. Gagging is they make a lot of noise and then it all pops out. Choking is silent. And you know what children choke? The ones that have only ever had slop. So they've never learnt to chew. And so when they're given something hard, you see there's a difference between that. So that's one of the reasons many people don't chew. They never learnt to chew as children. We should be eating nice hard food, crunchy food, apples, cucumbers, celery, radishes. Don't peel the children's apples. Even if they're 2, give them a whole apple. They'll work it out. Is that right? I never spoon-fed my children, and I don't spoon-feed our guests. Let them work it out. If someone says, what should I do for this? I say, what do you reckon? What do you reckon? Think about it, yeah? We talked about it this morning, the lost art of thinking. So let's look at those 5 things again. Number 1, we have say over what goes in. Whether it's junk and devitalised food or good, nourishing, organic food. We have say over how long it stays in the mouth until it's chewed very well. We have say over how often it goes in. Is it going in every 2 hours or is it going in 3 times a day? And we also have say over, would you do that? How long it's in the mouth. And we have say over environment of entry. We should cast off care and anxious thought when we sit to dine. I love that sentence. I had to memorise it from an old book. We should cast off care and anxious thought when we sit to dine. In other words, no controversial issues discussed at the table. And even if I had a little one who started crying at the table, I would put them out. You can't eat properly when you've got a screaming child at the table. And what you'll find is when you only feed your children at meal times, when they sit to eat, they're hungry. And where do they want to be? They want to be there. And please, adults, realise that when a child says they're starving, they don't know what starving is. And their stomachs are the same as ours. Their stomachs take just as long to break down food as ours do. And most children that say they're hungry between meals are like adults. It's thirst. The body doesn't often know the difference between hunger and thirst. So this is the only part we have say over. But there are 2 foods that are broken down in the mouth. The mouth is an alkaline environment, and there are certain enzymes that work best in an alkaline environment, and some enzymes work better in an acid, as we'll see. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands called, and they release lingual lipase. Lingual lipase is an enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. Saturated fat is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. So what's our saturated fat? Saturated fat is coconut, it's butter, it's shea butter, it's palm butter, palm oil. They're your saturated fats. I didn't mean to write that. I'm trying to master saying one thing and writing another. Saturated fats. They're the fats that are broken down in the mouth. Coconut is mostly saturated fat. Avocado has a little bit of saturated, but some monounsaturated. Macadamia, it has some saturated and a little bit of unsaturated fats. All your saturated fats are unique in that their breakdown begins in the mouth. Your polyunsaturated fats, your monounsaturated fats, they break down further down. The other food that's broken down in the mouth, or the breakdown begins in the mouth, is starch. And starch breaks down under the action of salivary amylase, which is called ptyalin. Ptyalin is the enzyme that breaks down starch. But the ptyalin in the mouth is almost non-existent until the molars are through. So the first teeth baby gets are 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. And they're called milk teeth. Why? Because that's all baby should have is milk. And you know, for hundreds of years, that's all baby had was milk. That's also taste time. And these teeth come through anywhere between about 7.5 to probably a year. That's when they're coming through. 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. And that's when baby should have, you know, a bit of cucumber, a bit of apple. They're the best first foods for baby, because baby's main food should be milk. That's what those first 8 teeth are called. And I'm going to explore that in more detail on Wednesday morning when we look at children. The next teeth that come are the molars. They come through here, and molars grind grain. And when those molars are fully through, those first molars, and they come through anywhere between 14 and 22 months of age, that's when the ptyalin is released. Another reason why feeding baby slop is bad news. I was reading one dentist, he said it's the worst thing for the gums and the teeth. We should be eating crunchy foods. Crunchy foods massage the gums, strengthen the teeth, and teach people to chew when that's their first foods. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in lying down and being fed slop, no. I never ever fed my babies food. At a meal table, if they could sit, if they had a few teeth and they could feed themselves, I'd give them the stem of the cabbage leaf, or the stem of the lettuce leaf, or their little teeth crunch into there and suck the juice. It's taste time. Another great thing is cut all the corn off a cob of corn and give them the cob. Oh, just the right size, they suck away on it. Remember, it's just taste time, that's all it is, taste time. But I'm going to go into the science behind that in more detail on Wednesday morning. But they're the 2 foods that the breakdown begins in the mouth. And that's why it's so important to chew, to allow that breakdown to begin. And then we come through a little valve here. It's a double-layered valve. It's called the cardiac sphincter. Cardiac because of its nearness to the heart muscle. And you talk to anyone who's worked in emergency, they will tell you, people come in, think they're having a heart attack when it's actually reflux. It's actually, what's reflux? Reflux is the flux of food coming up into the esophagus. We had a guest whose whole esophagus was ulcerated. And what's blamed as the problem? Acid. So what are they given? Antacids. They're given medication to cut the acids. It's like this. So I have a vegetable garden and the gate's open and the cows keep coming in and chewing and eating my vegetables. So I tell my husband, he said, I'll fix the problem, and he shoots the cows. Does that fix the problem? Shut the gate. Is that right? Just shut the gate. So there's no need to shoot the cows, shoot the acid. Shut the gate. The gate is the problem. The problem's not the acid. Because this is the only acid environment in the human body, the stomach. And it needs to be acid. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, fantastic, you must be digesting your food very well. Did you know that dogs have 10 times the acid that we have? Well, have you seen what they eat? My daughter's dog went across the road and got the cow that had died a week ago and grabbed its leg, back into the yard. Whoa, we knew straight away because of the smell. And he's eating it and he doesn't die. You know why? He's got 10 times the hydrochloric acid that we have. No, acid's a wonderful thing. And have you noticed that dogs don't get reflux or heartburn or stomach ulcers? Because it's not the acid. God designed the body to be acid, and the more acid, the better the digestion. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, well, you must be digesting your food in a couple of hours. That's why dogs can get away with eating rotten food, because they've got such strong hydrochloric acid. Nothing will live in hydrochloric acid. A drop will burn a hole in your hand. No, it's not the acid. If acid keeps coming up, it's called GERD, reflux, heartburn. No, the problem's the gate. And this gate is a muscle. And it's like this. And when we swallow food, because when you swallow, you're cutting off the tube to your lungs, that's your trachea. So you swallow and the esophagus starts to contract, taking the food down. And when the esophagus contracts, it causes a tightening of the cardiac sphincter, which opens, and our food goes into our stomach. It's a muscle. But if someone's stressed out, their muscles automatically tighten, and when that tightens, what does it do? It opens. So when someone's in a very stressful environment, it's not unusual, they will experience a bit of heartburn. But that can be one thread. And as you'll see as we go through these classes, when you've got a health condition, sometimes it's not just one thing. It can be a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of that. You know the straw that breaks the camel's back? A piece of straw can't break a camel's back. But on top of this, what happens? Tips the scales. See, this can be one part of it, is stress. But another is eating the main meal at the end of the day. Eating a large meal at the end of the day, when that sun goes down, our body knows, and all body systems start to slow down. So the best time to eat a large meal is in the middle of the day or at breakfast, because that's when our body is ready for it. But when the sun goes down, everything slows down and digestion slows down. And yet, with many people, that's when the largest meal is taken. So you want all hands on deck to digest that meal, but unfortunately, some have already started to slow down. And then the person sits down in their easy chair, and what happens? They fall asleep or they go to bed. And what happens is, because of gravity lying down, the food presses against the cardiac sphincter. It's not the odd day you might have an evening meal or the odd day you don't. It's what you do every day. And many people, because they say to me, but it's the only time I can eat. I'm busy all day long. And then they eat their large meal at the end of the day and then go to bed, and this is day after day, after week after week, after month, and little by little that cardiac sphincter is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. So to heal GERDs or reflux or heartburn, have most of your food at breakfast and lunch. And if anything is taken at night, it should be a bowl of blueberries or some light fruit, or a soup, or maybe some crackers and a bit of avocado, but just something very light at night, something that digests very quickly. And if you have most of your food at breakfast or lunch, you will not have an appetite at night, or not much.
Those foods again, please.
So the foods could be soup, it could be smoothie, it could be some fruit, or some crackers and avocado. So they're light foods. One lady said, oh, I eat lightly at night, I just have toast. I said, toast isn't light. Bread is a lot heavier to break down. Now we come into the stomach. And in the stomach is lined with big folds. And those folds are lined with gastric glands. And these gastric glands, probably 2/3 of them release mucus. And that mucus is 99% water, it's thick, and it plays a role to protect the lining of the stomach from what's released here. And what's released here from the parietal glands is hydrochloric acid. What's also released is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite only in an acid environment and release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. So this is what happens in the stomach. Pepsin breaks down protein. But there are many things that are happening to prevent that process. Hydrochloric acid and pepsin only unite in a very acid environment. And pepsin will only work in a very acid environment. And if someone's eating all day long, they're exhausting their gastric juices. And if someone's stressed at the meal, stress immediately inhibits the release of these enzymes. I think we know that. How do you feel? Do you feel like finishing your meal when you get some bad news? No, you don't, do you? That's because stress blocks the release of our gastric enzymes. Drinking with the meals, that's such a habit. Drinking with the meals waters down the hydrochloric acid, and remember, these only work in an acid environment. If you're drinking with your meals, you're diluting the acidity. We should stop drinking about a half an hour before the meal, and we should resume drinking about an hour and a half after the meal. If you're thirsty after the meal, by all means have a mouthful. A mouthful's not going to make a huge difference. But many people, they're so busy today, rush, sit to eat, I forgot to drink. And they're drinking with their meals. The research shows that hydrochloric acid levels are depleted as a person gets older. Well, I'd like to challenge that. I'd like to say it's only being depleted because of the lifestyle habits of the person. If they're eating breakfast like a king and lunch like a queen and or supper like a pauper, if they're drinking between their meals and not with their meals, if they're chewing very well and eating in a peaceful environment, there's no need for the digestive juices to be depleted. It was probably about 14 years ago now, I got our office girl to look for a book. It was called Observations on the Physiology of Digestion by Dr. William Beaumont. It was written in 1833, and I'd heard the story referred to in a few magazines. Dr. William Beaumont was a young doctor in the early 1800s. He was only 25 at the time when he was called to an accident in a trading store. A young man, only 18 years of old, named Alexis St. Martin, had sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach. A gun was an accident to the stomach. It blew out part of his ribs and part of his stomach. And ever after, even though he healed, ever after he had a hole in his stomach. And Dr. Beaumont immediately saw his opportunity, and he asked him to come home to his house after he'd healed, and he gave him little jobs, but he did experiments on him. He would get a piece of silk thread, put a bit of food on it and drop it into the stomach. 2 hours later, get it out and have a look. Put it back in. 4 hours later, get it out and have a look. So the book was written in 1844. The first third of the book is the story. Alexis St. Martin married, had children. Every now and then Dr. Beaumont would telegram him and say, do you mind coming and staying for a year? I'll put your children through school. I'll give you a nice house to live in. I just want to do a few more experiments. In fact, it changed the nutrition world. They did not realise how much digestion is a chemical process. And he meticulously documented his experiments and his findings. So the last 2/3 of the book is that. In fact, when you read the book, it's not easy to read because it's in Old English. But I'm used to reading the King James Version of the Bible, so it was okay. But what Dr. Beaumont found is that there were 5 things that caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later. So let's have a look at what would delay digestion to the point that the food is still in the stomach 8 hours later. If he overate, how many people are interested in an evening meal on the 25th of December? Not many, because they eat more, they eat richer, and they have no appetite at night, because even 5 hours later they're still feeling full. Yeah. It appears that only so much digestive juice is released, so when the stomach is overloaded, it just can't do it. It's going to take much longer than it usually does. You see, digestion takes approximately between 3.5 to 4 hours. And there's much research even since Dr. Beaumont's that shows this. And then the stomach loves a rest of at least 1 hour. Because as you will see as we go through this, your nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine. So even when your stomach's empty, you're still getting nutrients. What else caused the food to be, not all the food, but some of the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later? If he often ate, let me show you what happens when someone's eating every couple of hours. There's a little sphincter at the bottom of the stomach called the pyloric sphincter. And Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that it has sensors. And say a person's eaten breakfast, here's breakfast, and the sensors come out after several hours, and the food's broken down to what it should be, and so pyloric sphincter opens, and little by little the food starts to go through. It takes about 3.5 to 4 hours before the stomach gets empty. But let's say they have breakfast at 8 and it's now 10 o'clock, and they get a hunger pang, but they don't realise that it's actually thirst. So they have something to eat. So maybe it's a sandwich and a cup of tea. Maybe it's a cake and a cup of coffee. Or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts. Whatever it is, pyloric sphincter gets the message. Something's just come in and it's not broken down. Quick, shut the gate. So this gets its digestion and it joins the breakfast, and then pyloric sphincter opens and a little bit more goes through. So we've got a little bit more coming through, and then it's 12 o'clock. What happens at 12 o'clock? Lunch comes in. Shut the gate, quick, something's just come in, it's not broken down. Can you see what's happening? And I mentioned this afternoon with my husband had a 4-hour job to do, and it was still not done at the end of the day because he kept getting interrupted. That's exactly what happens with digestion. When you keep interrupting digestion, it slows digestion down. And this is a warm environment. And what's happening to that food in the warm environment? It starts to ferment and starts to give off fumes. And that's called bloating, is that right? The feeling of bloating, the feeling of fullness, that the food is not getting digested properly. What also caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later, if he had large fluid with the meal. As I mentioned earlier, a mouthful's not going to make a big difference. We had a guy attend our program and he was drinking 4 cups of water with every meal. Well, by the end of the week, he'd got it down to 1 cup. He was getting there. He was getting there. If you're well hydrated when you sit to eat, you will not need to drink with your meal. And adults, have your eye on the children. Give them water to drink half an hour before the meal. I'll tell you that they're thirsty, but you know what I say to my little ones? If they say, I don't want to drink water, I say, I'm so sorry, sweetheart, that you can't have lunch. Or you can't have breakfast. And I always say to my grandchildren, have you watered your garden? It's a little garden down there. So they come in and they say, Grandma, I've watered my garden. I say, I'm so glad, now you can have breakfast. Also, what slowed digestion down was if he was stressed. Sometimes Alexis St. Martin would get annoyed with this silk thread going in and out of his stomach all the time. But the only time he really got annoyed was if he'd had alcohol. Alcohol slows digestion down. How many Americans would tick the box for all of those? No wonder hydrochloric acid levels are reducing with age. So we need to give the stomach the right condition, because protein is a very important nutrient in the body, and some people are protein deficient even though they're eating a lot of protein, because digestion isn't able to break it down sufficiently. And until it's broken down to tiny substances like amino acids, it cannot be absorbed. Cannot be absorbed into the blood. Now there's one more thing that's released from here, and that is the intrinsic factor. What's the intrinsic factor? These are the parietal glands, so they release hydrochloric acid, they release pepsinogen, and they unite to produce pepsin that breaks down protein. But what also is released here is the intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor is required to absorb B12. Most people who are B12 deficient, it's because they lack the intrinsic factor. And if the person's eating all day long and they're stressed with their meals, and they have their largest meal at the end of the day and they're drinking lots of fluid with the meal, yes, their hydrochloric acid and their pepsinogen will be greatly reduced and their pepsin doesn't work, but the intrinsic factor is also greatly reduced or compromised. Let me give you the B12 story, because understanding how B12 works in the body, you start to know why some people would be deficient. Let's say my thumb is B12, and let's say this is the R protein. And R protein and B12 are united in food. And it's hydrochloric acid that releases them. So if someone's got low hydrochloric acid, can you see that the R protein might not be released from the B12? And it can't be absorbed until the R protein's released. And so another reason why hydrochloric acid levels should be good. So hydrochloric acid releases the R protein from the B12. But what's released in the stomach is the intrinsic factor. Here's intrinsic factor. So B12 and intrinsic factor, they float together all down the small intestine till they get to the last part of the small intestine called the ileum. Then they unite, and when they unite, then they can be absorbed into the body. So you can see that most people that are B12 deficient, it's because of digestion. And if someone's low B12, will the doctor ever ask you about your digestion? And so the majority of people that are on antacids, you will find they're also B12 deficient. And they could get B12 injections every month, but what's the definition of insanity? You've got to find out you've got to find out the cause and remedy that. So how can we boost hydrochloric acid levels? Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and supper like a pauper, and drink between meals, and make sure that it's a pleasant environment when you eat. I was at a health retreat recently, and two of the staff, I saw them grabbing food and running, and I went, There's a rule at our health retreat. If you're going to eat, you have to sit. And they smiled at me. Because you can't digest that meal. Now, let's say you've got a lot to do and you're hungry, you're better to have a smoothie or have a vegetable juice, and then when it's all settled, then sit and eat. And that's why it's a good idea if you're busy, if you've got a busy program, have a decent breakfast, because that will take you a long way. I have friends that owned a restaurant. They said, we eat breakfast like a king. We have our main meal at breakfast. Because often the restaurant doesn't start easing till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we know that's going to be our next meal. So you've got to look ahead, and on Saturday morning I'm going to show you the part of our brain that looks ahead. It's called foresight. Looks ahead and assesses what's going to happen tomorrow. How can I prepare for that? And on this fast society, when our body's not given the right conditions, that part of our brain can often be greatly compromised. You see, B12 is found in organically grown root vegetables. B12 is found in apples and any fruit that you pick straight off the tree. Those blueberries straight off the tree, you're getting some B12 because it's an airborne bacteria. And the reason why meat has B12 is because animals are eating grass that last week had their droppings on it. It's a bacteria. That's what B12 is. So you've got to be careful with some B12 supplements that they aren't made out of sewage. It's a bacteria. Got that? Sewage. We have a B12 supplement, and it's made out of, I think they culture molasses and grape skins and produce the B12 bacteria on that. A lot of B12 supplements are sublingual. That means they're absorbed under the tongue, which means they can bypass the need for the intrinsic factor. The juice of a lemon just before the meal will boost acid. A third of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little water just before the meal, that'll wake anything up. That'll boost hydrochloric acid. Maybe a hot ginger tea, just a third of a cup, just a little bit. That hot ginger will also stimulate hydrochloric acid.
Does it have to be hot?
Ideally hot. Ideally hot, because you're preparing that stomach for digestion, and if it's hot, it gets absorbed straight away. Some people ask me about soup. What about soup? Most of meals, when soup's taken, it's the first thing. It's the entree. And because it's hot and because it's so mineral rich, it's absorbed very quickly. Far quicker than, say, a glass of cold water. So that's really all that happens in the stomach, is the protein digestion. And then we come down to the duodenum. The duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. And the duodenum is an alkaline environment. And notice that we've got the liver. The liver is what makes bile, so that's the first way we're going to look at. The liver releases bile. And the gallbladder, which is this little reservoir under the liver, it holds the bile. And the bile breaks down unsaturated fats. Do you remember where the saturated fats are broken down? They're broken down in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase. The bile emulsifies the fat into tiny particles, and then the pancreas comes along So notice that the bile duct goes into the neck of the pancreas, so it comes into the duodenum, releasing bile, and then the pancreas, one of the first things it does is release sodium bicarb. And sodium bicarb is released by the pancreas, you can see why, to ensure that it's an alkaline environment, because the most alkaline substance is sodium bicarbonate. The pancreas also releases pancreatic lipase. Now, if we have a look back up at lingual lipase, lipase is an enzyme that breaks down fats. The bile emulsifies the fats into tiny particles, ready for the pancreatic lipase to further break it down, ready to be absorbed out of the gut and into the body. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember the lingual salivary amylase is ptyalin that started starch digestion. When the starch got partially digested and it reached the stomach, it's put on hold in that acid environment. And then it comes into the duodenum, once again in an alkaline environment, and so the pancreas releases pancreatic amylase and it finalises starch digestion. So starch is begun in the mouth and finalised in the duodenum under the action of pancreatic amylase. The pancreas also releases trypsin. And trypsin is an enzyme that breaks down protein. Now, where did protein digestion begin? It began in the stomach, and it's finalised in the duodenum under the action of trypsin. And there's also another trypsin. It's called chymotrypsin. So there are two enzymes that finalise protein digestion. I've got some good news. It's not going to get any harder than this. That's basic, the digestion. Okay, students, considering this, and this is a surprise to most people, it was a surprise to me, what is the main organ of digestion? It's the pancreas. And this explains why if someone gets pancreatic cancer, have you noticed they don't live long? Sometimes they're taken in a matter of 5 weeks, and it's because they suffer from malnutrition, because they can't access their foods, because their pancreas can't do the final breakdown on all the main food groups. Main food groups, we looked at protein, fibres, fats. Can't get them. If the cell can't get them, the cell can't last. Proteolytic enzymes, proteolytic enzymes is a name given to enzymes that break down protein. So let's have a look at proteolytic enzymes. Pepsin is a proteolytic enzyme. The trypsins, we'll just call them the trypsin family. The trypsins are also proteolytic enzymes. But God, in his wisdom and mercy, put some proteolytic enzymes in some foods. The core of the pineapple contains bromelain. And bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. And the good news is you don't have to eat the core of a pineapple every meal. That'd be tough going. That's tough stuff.
Is it only in the core, Barbara?
It's mostly in the core. You'll get trace amounts in the rest. So when I'm somewhere and they're cutting up a pineapple and they're cutting out the core, I go, ah! And it's heavy going just eating the middle bits. But when I cut a pineapple, I cut it and I cut it like pieces of a pie. So everyone gets a tiny little bit of core and a nice bit of the succulent fruit. That's the best way to eat it. But the good news is you can buy supplements that contain bromelain. So if someone has pancreatic cancer, they need to take the digestive enzymes, and you'll find mostly they have bromelain and papain. And papain comes from the seed of the papaya or the papaya. I don't advise black pepper because black pepper is irritating to the lining of the gut. But there's a wonderful alternative. You dry your papaya or pawpaw seeds and put them in your black pepper grinder. They just look like peppercorns. And they're hot, so they give that little bit of a bite. And no one will ever know that they're grinding the papaya seeds, and you're getting a little bit of a proteolytic enzyme digestive aid. And if they say, this black pepper tastes a bit different, you just smile. Yes, say yes, it's my healthy black pepper.
Can you eat them whole? Like
You-
just swallow them?
You certainly can, but they're not very nice.
But are the benefits to it if you just like chug it with some water?
You'd need to break it up.
Okay.
That's why grinding it's good. You need to chew them.
Okay.
My sister does, but it's not very nice. It's like the seed of the grapefruit. If you ever bite on the seed of the grapefruit, you'll think the grapefruit's sweet. Because it's so bitter, but that grapefruit seed extract is strong antifungal, which we looked at this morning. So anyone that has a compromised pancreas for any reasons, they need to take the digestive enzymes to help with the finalising of the breakdown of their nutrients. And now we come to the grand finale of digestion. Lining the small intestine are villi, and up the middle of these villi is the lacteal. This is part of the lymphatic system. And all through the villi is the blood capillary network. And remember that our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube, and anything that's in that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down to tiny substances, and we've just looked at that process, then absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you and me, because it's the blood that contains the life. Surrounding the gastrointestinal tract is a thick turf wall made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium, often called our microbiome, also called the friendly or the healthy bacteria. You've heard of that? That's the lining of the gut. And it is this bacteria that is important in the finalising of our digestion. So these microbes that line our gut, and we looked at this morning, are responsible for the final breakdown of our food. But don't those enzymes break our food down? They certainly do. So what does the gut flora do? Something it causes a release of is your B vitamins. So the gut flora is very important for the release of your B vitamins. Who wrote that? Breakdown. Get it right. They are also responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of our gut and into the blood. They play an important role in protecting our blood against any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. They also nourish the cells that line our gastrointestinal tract. That's why the gut flora is so important, and it's finalising the digestion of our nutrients out of the blood, out of the gut and into the blood. And that's why all of this is so important, because it can only take through singular structure. So what these enzymes, their role is to bring everything down to singular structures. Let me give you the story of protein for a minute. Let's say this is for illustration purposes, let's say this is protein. So under the action of pepsin in the stomach, the protein's broken down to peptides and polypeptides. And then the peptides and the polypeptides come into the small intestine, and the trypsins break the peptides down to amino acids, the polypeptides down to peptides and amino acids, and then amino acids. And it's only as amino acids can it be absorbed into the blood. But let's say the person's eating all day long, drinking with their meals, having the largest meal at the end of the day, stressed out, and some protein doesn't get broken down, and it comes into the duodenum, and the pancreas says, "What are you doing here?" And protein says, "Sorry, but they're drinking with their meals and they're eating all day long and they're stressed out." And okay, says trypsin, and it does the best it can, but it can only get it down to peptides and polypeptides. And so the polypeptides, you see, all of our nutrients really should be absorbed by halfway down the small intestine. So all that's left here should be just insoluble fibre, which is your cellulose, which you find in lots in your fruits and vegetables. And as you'll see, that's important. So they're coming down here, and they come through the ileocecal valve, a double-layered valve here, and colon says to the peptides and the polypeptides, "What are you doing here?" They said, "Sorry, but they're eating all day long, they're drinking with their meals, they're stressed out, largest meal at the end of the day." And pepsin was pretty compromised. The trypsin family did what they could, but this is it. Righto. So then it has to create a lot of bacteria to try and calm these partially digested proteins, to sort of try and reduce the rotting process, especially if it's meat. You see, when meat breaks down, it putrefies. When vegetables break down, they ferment. And that putrefaction process is a little bit more toxic. And that's why these microbes are there to protect from any harmful pathogens that may be in the gut. And that creates a lot of methane gas. You've heard of methane gas? A lot of wind, a lot of bloating. It's like one man said, "Barbara, what can you do? I've got so much gas." And I say to him, "Well, I do notice that you eat very, very fast." When you eat very, very fast, you're not chewing your food properly, and so lumps are coming through that the enzymes do their best, but they can't properly do it, so they actually end up in here where they should not be. So that's part of the equation. So this gut flora is very important. Unfortunately today, there are things, drugs, sometimes foods, that are killing off the gut flora. But first of all, let me tell you about a documentary I saw on the microbiome in the gut. And they had an obstetrician there, a gentleman in his 70s, so he's been an obstetrician for many years. He said, "We always thought God made a mistake putting the anus and the birth canal so close." So he said, what we used to do 40, 50 years ago is give every woman an enema when she went into labour, so that we could empty the colon a bit, so that when the baby was born, they were protected against what may come out of the anus. He said, "We now know it's a perfect design." Because when When the birth canal stretches open, the anus also stretches open, and the air hits the baby, and the baby's first breath is those fumes coming out of the anus. Did you hear what the obstetrician said? A perfect design. Because when a woman's got her baby in utero, that baby's gut is sterile, no gut flora. The baby's literally showered with the mother's gut flora when it's born. And the breast milk doesn't come in for 3 days. For the first 3 days, there's a thick, creamy substance called colostrum. And colostrum is high in microbes, because that's how the immune system is built up. In the colon, there are little tiny organs that look very much like the tonsils, and they are very similar to the tonsils, only they're in the colon, and they are Peyer's patches. P-E-Y-E-R. Peyer's patches are part of the building of our lymphatic system, and they're also part of the lymphatic system in that they release waste from the lymphatic system. I think it's on Friday we look at the importance of activity, and I'll be discussing your lymphatic system, and which is your body's vacuum cleaner. Sweeps away waste from the tissues, throw the wastes into the lymph nodes, or straight into the colon through the Peyer's patches, or straight into the throat with the tonsils, and that's where you cough up a lump or two. Rejoice if you cough up a lump or two. Where was it before you coughed it up? It's just part of the body's eliminating system. And in those Peyer's patches are lymphocytes, and lymphocytes are one of your white blood cells. So this is the connection between the gut flora and the building up of the immune system. So what breaks down the gut flora? Antibiotics do a good job. They kill the good and the bad alike. What also breaks down gut flora? Your statin drugs. They do a good job at breaking up the gut flora. What also knocks off gut flora is long-term painkillers, especially your narcotics. They break up gut flora. I've met 3 men in my travels, actually 4, who've sustained serious back injuries. Serious. Miracle they're any of them alive. And a bit of surgery happened to sort of fix it as best as it could. And what are they sent home with? Pain-killing drugs. What's the result then? The more they're on them, what's happening? The less they work, and now they're addicted. So all these men told me their stories of how they got off all their painkillers and they strengthened their core muscles. Core. Your core muscles are all connected to your spine. And when you strengthen your core muscles, you automatically strengthen the muscles that are holding your spine together. If the spine's been damaged, I've got some good news. Muscle, ligament and tendon can be strengthened to sustain and hold that. But you know what else? As you strengthen your core, you increase blood supply there, and the blood feeds the vertebrae, and the vertebrae can actually repair. Isn't that good news? But you know what these 3 men all told me? They have to exercise every day, and they will for the rest of their life. But you know what they keep reminding themselves? They're alive. They're functioning. They're off their painkillers. And the Bible says that one day Jesus will return. And guess what? When he returns, we'll all be cured. Amen. Got that? Yes. That's why we need to know him now.
Yes.
We need to know him now. That's when all be cured. But you know what? Until then, we can manage. And these men are managing very well. But they can't let a day go without keeping those core muscles strong. Because that's the other thing the painkillers do. They knock out your gut flora. And when you knock out your gut flora, you've now got a compromise in final breakdown. You've got a compromise in absorption. You've got a compromise in your protection. You've got a compromise in nourishing the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. So how can we nourish and rebuild the lining of our gut flora. Medicine has an answer. It'll only cost you $10,000. It's called fecal transplant. And I'll let your imagination run wild with that. This is what they do. They take the feces from a healthy colon, and I'm sorry to say this, but I'm just telling you as it is, and they put it in a blender. I'm sure that's all they use the blender for. I'm just telling you. And they put it with a bit of water so it'll blend, and then they put it into a very large syringe, and they put the person under anaesthetic, and they put the syringe into the anus and insert all of that healthy feces. And that's supposed to help restore the gut flora. But one man told me he paid $10,000 for his daughter to have that. She wasn't interested in working with the body and eating well. A few months later, because of her bad lifestyle, she got a bad cold, she went on antibiotics, and guess what happened to all the gut flora? So he said he wanted her to come to our retreat. And my question was this: is your daughter interested? He said no. Well, you know, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. And I often say that when people say, I want my daughter to come, I say, does she want to come? Often you can get people there by saying, I just want to shout you a little holiday. And when they start to hear the lectures, do you know what I find? The light bulb goes on and they start to realise what they've been doing. Education is power. Something else is happening with the compromise of this gut flora. The cells that line the gastrointestinal tract are nourished by the gut flora. So let's say here we've got a very unhealthy cell that lines the gut because it hasn't got any gut flora. And here is a very happy cell because this cell is being well nourished with gut flora. And then I'll come over here so you can see it. In the gastrointestinal tract, and I'll talk about it later in the week, when wheat goes in, wheat was hybridised in the 50s, and in the hybridisation process, the intensive crossbreeding, they wanted to produce a plant with a high yield of grain. Well, after many years, took them about 15 years, they finally got a plant that only grows that high. Have you noticed? Those from my era, wheat used to grow that high. But they couldn't retain the height because the heavy yield of grain, the stalk broke before it could be harvested. So they went back and they've got this plant that's very thick stem, only little, and it holds the heavy yield of grain. They did it to save the starvation crisis or to help in India, Africa, Mexico. And because it was wheat, they rushed it through with no safety studies. Does that sound familiar? Rushed it through with no safety studies. I am the master of my destiny, yes? I am the one that says yes or no to what goes in my body. They rushed it through with no safety studies, and it's only now they're starting to see that the protein or the gluten structure became incredibly complex. So it's almost only a cast iron gut that can break it down, and there aren't many of them anymore. So what happens is, when it's broken down, it breaks down to something called glutamorphine. What's morphine? Morphine is an opiate derivative. So here's the gluto, there's the morphine. And when someone like myself, and there's no dairy in my heritage and I can't break it, I know I can't handle it, if I have milk, it breaks down to caseo morphine. So here's our caseo, there's morphine. Let me show you what happens when it comes down the gut. So when it comes down to the happy cell that is being well nourished, it can knock off the morphine, so only caseo gets in, and it can knock off the morphine so that only gluto gets in. But this cell here, it does not have the ability to knock off the morphine of glutamorphine or caseomorphine, so the caseo and the glutamorphine both get into the blood. They go straight to the opiate receptor sites in the brain that pick it up. And there are several books now showing the link between dairy and gluten and mental illness. Ooh. So what are the books? Gut and Psychology by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. The other one's called Grain Brain by a neurologist called Dr. David Perlmutter.
Can you repeat those names, please?
Okay, Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She wrote the book Gut and Psychology. It's a bestseller. It's a fairly well-known book. Also, Dr. David Perlmutter, Perlmutter. I'm not sure if the book's called Grain Brain or Brain Grain, something like that. If you just put David Perlmutter in, you'll get his books. He shows in there, he quotes some psychiatrists who are taking their schizophrenic psychotic patients off wheat and dairy, 50% improvement. And there are two other books by Dr. Bruce Fife. One's called Stop Alzheimer's Now, the other's called Stop Autism Now. And he shows too the link between dairy and wheat and autism and Alzheimer's. He says, autistic child, you take them off refined sugar, all gluten, all dairy, 50% improvement. Yes?
Does that include raw dairy?
Pardon?
Does that include
Raw dairy is different. But I myself, because it's not in my heritage, I still can't handle raw dairy. The only thing I can handle is maybe an organic yogurt. That's what I can handle. But that's because the caseo and protein. Did you know in a well-made yogurt there's no caseo or the protein's all been broken down? Whew. How can we build the gut flora? You've probably heard of lectins, and I'll be talking about lectins when I talk about the acid alkaline. Lectins are a plant chemical in many foods. And if you've got good gut flora, it disarms the lectins. And if lectins get into your blood, they increase inflammation. So it's all back to gut flora. Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. And he didn't know the detail of what I've just shown you today. How can we strengthen the gut flora? Probiotics. And the best probiotics come from a plant-based source. And the best time to take probiotics is 3/4 of an hour before breakfast. 3/4 of an hour before breakfast, before you eat, that pyloric sphincter is open. So the drinks you have go straight down where we want it. Yes?
Would that be true of prebiotics as well?
Prebiotics. You heard a lot about prebiotics. Prebiotics are what feeds the good gut flora, and what feeds good gut flora is fruit and vegetable fibre. So there's no need to take prebiotics, just eat lots of fruit and some veggies. Because that insoluble cellulose, it's nourishment for the gut flora. So again, getting back to fruits and vegetables. I find in many countries today, part of their traditional diet was always some form of cultured food. So sauerkraut in Europe is popular, and miso in the Asian countries, yogurts, kefir, kimchi. There's lots of cultured foods, and they help to restore the gut flora. You can make kefir, ideally with, if you can get organic raw milk, or you can make kefir with almond milk, you can make kefir with coconut milk, you can make kefir with almond milk. So there's lots of ways you can make kefir, or yogurts, similar. And now we come through the ileocecal valve. When the contents of the small intestines come through the ileocecal valve, it's a one-way valve because you don't want anything from here going back into here. And one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. All that really should be left now is insoluble fibre. Notice down here we've got a little organ called the appendix. And God did not make a mistake when he put the tonsils there, as we looked at, and he didn't make a mistake when he put the appendix there. The appendix has two important roles in the body. It's called the colon's oil can. So it lubricates, helps to lubricate to get things through the colon. So it's called the colon's oil can, and it also releases antibacterial fluid. Because sometimes what's coming out of the small intestine can be fairly toxic, especially if someone's on a high meat diet and also having a lot of sugar and maybe wine with their meal. What's coming out of here is pretty toxic. If someone does choose to eat meat, it should be eaten with a lot of vegetables because the vegetables help to get it through, and also the vegetables, the fermentation does slow down somewhat the putrefaction of the meat. See, dogs get away with it a lot better because their gastrointestinal tract is 1 yard long. Ours is 10 yards long. A lady said to me she had her, because it's just near your right hip bone, she had her right ovary taken because it had a cyst on it. And when she woke up, the doctor said, "Oh, while I was there, I took your appendix." You know, I do acknowledge there might be times when surgery is necessary, but you've almost got to have a piece of paper and say, "Don't touch my appendix, don't touch this, leave me this, please sign your name." So how long should transit time be? No longer than 24 hours, ideally 16 hours. And that colon has a mind of its own. If you tell it to start going 16 hours, it won't, will it? It needs gentle stimulation. So if one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out, so stools are formed, hydration is vital. But here's something else that's vital. It's called promptly answer nature's immediate call. Got that? If the body says go, you got to go. Because if the body says go and you don't go, we just thank God that right at the end of the colon, he put a little loop there. And he put a muscle there. It's called puborectalis. And that holds up the last part of the colon so we don't have accidents. But if you feel to go, it's because this part of the colon has filled up. And if you don't go, then what comes into the last part of the colon goes back into the previous part, and the water still gets taken out. Now, in a crisis, we are glad that we can hold. Maybe the planes are about to land and you cannot get out of your seat. But many people use that because they're watching a documentary and they don't want to leave it because they want to finish the end. Or they're on the phone to a friend and they feel to go, but they want to keep talking to the friend. Or they're digging a garden and they don't want to go till they finish the garden. Or they're, etc., etc., etc. We all know the bits and pieces. But what happens is that day after day after year, the colon starts to weaken. So that's why one of the most important things to do is to promptly answer nature's immediate call. The most natural time to go is after a meal, because when food goes into the stomach and it starts to contract and loosen to break up that food. That goes all the way down the gastrointestinal tract. Now, my children were homeschooled, and after every meal, the children weren't in the house. They were all lined up at the little house because we lived out in the bush. We didn't have electricity, so we had a very, very deep hole up the hill with a little house around it. And the children would all line up at the fruit trees. And the older children would work out who's got the one with the greatest need. But what happens, children go to school and they're too embarrassed to leave the classroom, or they're not allowed to leave the classroom, and so they start to develop the habit of holding on. And that weakens the colon. That's why answering nature's call is a very important one. Also, the colon needs hydration. So we should be drinking at least 8 glasses of water a day, at least. Here's a good rule of thumb. 1 quart to 25 pound. No, 1 quart to 50 pound. So that's 2 quarts to 100 pound. That's a good rule of thumb. It's a good rule of thumb for the children too. Exercise. We looked at this in our last lecture when we talked about the organs of elimination. Exercise massages the colon, especially your core strengthening exercise gives great massage to the colon. And also position is very important. So what I mean by position, so I'll draw it here. Here's the throne, and here is the person sitting on the throne doing their daily evacuation. When a person sits on the throne, in that sitting position, puborectalis remains tight. Things can still get through, but if the person has a little stool in front of the throne, and so they mimic the squatting position, so the knees are up in the air. This is a very happy person because evacuation is happening very effectively. What happens when puborectalis relaxes, so basically it's coming down here, it means that that colon opens right up and the contents can pass with the greatest of ease. The problem is when the feces builds up in here because the person doesn't go when they should and because they're not drinking enough water, and the other that's very important is fibre. Fibre stimulates peristalsis and helps to sweep out all the little corners in the colon. What happens is that a lot of pressure is put on there, and then these horrible little things called hemorrhoids happen. I used to work in an operating theatre and we did hemorrhoidectomies. Whew. All they do is put a stitch around the base and then cut it with scissors. How's the person going to feel when they wake up? Oh, nothing compared to how they feel when they pass their first bowel motion. Oh, I tell you what, torture's alive and well. And they take painkillers, and what does painkillers do to the colon? Dehydrates even more, and we get in this terrible vicious cycle. Can you heal hemorrhoids? You certainly can. It's important to eat a high fibre diet so that that colon is regulating and going every day. 2 meals a day should equal 2 evacuations a day. 3 meals a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. Dr. Kellogg said if you eat 3 meals a day and go once, you're constipated. So, keeping well hydrated, exercising every day, taking that position, because the squatting position takes all pressure off the anus. So it's a good way to prevent hemorrhoids, and it's a good way to help heal hemorrhoids.
Is there a point of no return for a hemorrhoid, that it does need to be surgically removed, or?
I don't think so.
Pardon?
I don't think so. I never say never. So if it's very severe, then we need to do a little bit more severe treatment. And you can get 2 tubs. And these tubs need to be big enough for you to be able to sit in. And the water is to come from your mid-thigh to, say, your bottom of your ribs. So this person is sitting in hot water And so the water comes up to here. Now, if the hemorrhoids are so bad that it's impossible for them to sit like that, they can get a blow-up pillow. You know, those little rubber pillows, or even children, you know, what they put around them. And then they can sit in that. And this is hot. And they sit in the hot water for 3 minutes. And that probably averages about 107 degrees Fahrenheit. If the person can't take it that hot, you bring it down until they can handle it. And then the cold, and ideally you put ice cubes in this, and that's 30 seconds. So they're sitting in the cold, and that's only 30 seconds. So this person has a little bit of a shocked look on their face.
And is it important that position, so not going in a bathtub where your legs can be stretched out? Do they have, so this way your hemorrhoids are exposed? Is that the purpose of
Yeah, and also you just want to target that area. That's all you want to target. And that's done 3 times. That's not long. What's that? We'll do the maths on that. 15 minutes at the very most.
once a day?
If it feels fantastic and brings relief, you can do it twice a day. If the hemorrhoids are really severe, remember I said, if they want to avoid operation, they might even do it 3 times a day.
For how long?
Until they're not there.
How long do you think it takes though? Is it like
It all depends on how serious they are, or how severe they are, and also how diligent the person is to do what you've got to do. They will, see, listen to your body. That it feels good. What's the body saying? I like that. Please do it again. And this can bring incredible relief to the area. And then at night they have a suppository. And the suppository is made with 50% castor oil. Castor oil penetrates deeper than any other oil and can help to break up all unnatural formations. And 50% coconut oil. What the coconut oil does, you put it in the fridge so it causes it to go firm, because you can only insert the suppository, of course, if it's firm. And what you do is you get disposable gloves. Here's the disposable gloves. And you melt the coconut oil, mix them together, and you tie them off, fill up the fingers and tie them off. And then when it's time to go to bed, you cut it off, you peel off the glove and insert the suppository. And ideally the suppository is inserted until the end of the finger, so the suppository will probably end up being here. If it sits in the opening, it'll be very uncomfortable. And then what will happen is that oil will dissolve and it'll be very soothing and healing to the hemorrhoid.
So you're saying your finger goes all the way up to that red line that you just made? And
Well, it depends on different colons, it'll go up so far. But you want to get through that. The anal sphincter takes up about that much. You want to get past the anal sphincter. To me, that takes a bit of work, but I would far rather that than surgery.
And this could get rid of hemorrhoids altogether.
Yep.
And when you say cold water, are the ice cubes still floating in the water?
Ideally so. Ideally so. And often, and you have a boiling kettle so that while you're in the cold, you heat this up a bit more, and you want to maintain it at about that. If someone can only handle 103 degrees, after they've been in the cold, they can handle it a little bit hotter. So that's serious stuff, but that's God's surgery. That's natural surgery that is not near as brutal or violent, but it's certainly powerful treatment. So this alternating hot and cold can be done for all problems in this area. Fissures, it'll help to heal a fissure. What's a fissure? Sometimes it can be a hole coming out the side of the colon. It's very uncomfortable. What about if someone has irritable bowel? What happens if they're going 10 times a day? This hot and cold treatment is also very powerful. But they need to have something that will coat and soothe and heal the lining of the gut. There are 5 foods that can be very irritating to the colon when it is in that inflamed condition. So the 5 foods are dairy. Probably the only exception would be raw organic yogurt might sit well. But I'm speaking to many people who live in cities who aren't doing that. The hybridised wheat. You can get an excellent bread and you can order it online, or it's Simple Needs. And this Simple Needs bread is gluten-free and it is sourdough.com. And it'll keep in the fridge for 6 weeks. It'll go a little hard, but you toast it and immediately lightens up. It's a delicious bread and a great alternative to wheat bread. Number 3, oats. My 3 sons have oatmeal for breakfast every day and love it, but they don't have any health problems. But if someone has an irritation in the colon, the oats must stop because they're high in lectins, and the lectins can increase inflammation. Number 4, peanuts. Peanuts are commonly contaminated with mould. You've probably heard of anaphylactic shocks to peanuts. It's the mould on the peanuts. Number 5 is the refined sugar. The refined sugar, it just feeds any microbial activity big time. So those foods must stop, and there is a herb called slippery elm. And when you put hot water with slippery elm, it's the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And when you put hot water with it, it goes a little slippery, which is great for the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. In fact, it has a growth stimulant, and that growth stimulant stimulates rapid healing in the lining of the gut. It coats, soothes, and heals the lining of the gut. So I was in New Zealand a few years ago and I gave this lecture, and a lady came up to me in her late 70s. She said, I've had irritable bowel for 30 years. I've been on steroids, I've been on anti-inflammatories, but she said, I'm still going 8 times a day to the bathroom. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. I'm not criticising this lady, she does not know. She said, I had no idea that these foods were irritating to the lining of the colon. She said, I eat them every day. I have wheat sandwiches for lunch every day with cheese. She said, I have cups of tea and coffee with dairy and refined sugar. She said, I have oat for breakfast every day. She said, I have my peanut butter on my toast every day. So she immediately stopped those foods. She started to have millet for breakfast. She started to get a gluten-free bread. She started to use coconut milk or almond milk. She started to use almond butter instead of peanut butter. She used a little maple syrup, and she started to take the slippery elm. She took it 4 times a day before every meal and just before bed every night. This was Tuesday night. Thursday night she came to me and she said, I can't believe it, I'm not bleeding from the colon anymore. She said, all the cramping has stopped. And she said, my bowel movements have gone from 8 a day down to 4 a day. She's not healed, but what's her body saying? Yes! That's why you've got to listen. If it works, do it, yes?
Are you going to do anything about intestinal, like parasites?
Do you know parasites, why are they there? They're only there because they're getting well fed, meaning that the colon is not evacuating as regularly as it should. If this colon is working well, there's nowhere for the parasites to live. So there are authors that claim that parasites are causing this, and this, but you know what my question is, why are they there? Why are they there? Yes, there are herbs that will kill parasites, and you might be familiar with them, black walnut. And that is so bitter, you'd far prefer to take it in a capsule or a tablet form. And the other one is wormwood, very bitter herb. And something that parasites and worms hate. And by the way, everyone that has animals in their home will have parasites because animals carry that. So animals should be outside the home. If they are in the home, it's just where the tiles are, and it is not in the kitchen, and it is not in the bedroom. I was doing a live blood analysis on a girl about 6 years ago, and in her blood, I saw parasites. I saw 2. I said, do you have any animals in your home? She said, I sleep with 4 cats every night. I said, well, look what they've given you. Because they are meat eaters, that really feeds the parasites. But parasite and worms, they hate pumpkin seeds. So it's a good idea to start every meal with about 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds.
Should they be roasted or should they be raw?
Oh, they can be roasted. And also garlic, raw garlic. Put it in your guacamole. It's nice. Even the kids will eat it in there, won't they? Yeah?
What about polyps?
What about polyps? If you start to give the colon the right conditions, they will automatically clear up. And diverticulitis. Diverticulitis are little pockets like this. And what happens is, often the neck dries out, and they tell people with diverticulitis, don't eat seeds, or the seed could get caught in there. You can eat seeds as long as they're ground to powder. But once you start giving the colon the right conditions, they can automatically heal because you actually need the fibre. The fibre stimulates. Remember, that's your prebiotic, feeding your probiotics. Most people don't eat enough fibre. But colonic irrigations are very good for this. Colonic irrigations is where warm water's going in and coming out, in and out, in and out, and it can clean up old pockets, and it can certainly clean up the necks, and the water can even come in like this, and so eventually they're healed. Medicine has no cure for diverticulitis. But if you give the colon the right conditions, it will start to heal. And you can put a compress on the outside of castor oil. Castor oil penetrates very, very deep, and castor oil can be used for constipation. It'll help to loosen it. Castor oil compresses can be used for irritable bowel because it'll soak through and it'll stimulate healing in the area. It'll break up unnatural formations. And the castor oil compress can be worn for 5 hours a day for at least 5 days a week. You want several layers of cloth, and just moisten the cloth with castor oil. Put it on the abdomen, cover it with a bit of plastic. Often your pants can hold it into place. Some people sleep with it, some people would rather have it on through the day. Maybe every 3 days it'll feel a little, you just put your finger on the compress, and if you can see shiny oil, it's fine. But if you put your finger on the compress and you don't see any oil, you just need to put a little bit more on. Maybe every 3 days you'll put another teaspoon on. Yes? Gastritis, the same thing for colitis, gastritis, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease. The same thing will help them all, which is stop these foods and take the slippery elm. If someone's going 10 times a day, I suggest take slippery elm every 2 hours. And as things slow down, then you can back off on the slippery elm. Yes?
My husband started wearing the castor oil pack and he got little red dots.
Okay. How often was he wearing it?
He just started wearing it and it was in like the first couple of weeks.
Because sometimes if the castor oil, when you apply it, because it's starting to break up, you know, some waste in there, and sometimes the waste comes out through the skin, so you can back off and just use it as the skin allows you to use it.
Right, the dots stayed there though. They were like almost like little blood spots.
Well, I'd stop that for a month, then try again. And next time only wear it for 2 hours.
Okay.
Wear it just a little less. So remember, you're watching. The one thing that you must watch for is your body's response. Because your body will tell you what no one can tell you. Got that? No one can tell you. So you listen. That's why 4 or 5 hours causes the little spots. We'll go back to 2 hours. You just play with it. And if the lady was going 10 times a day to the toilet and the slippery elm slowed it down to 4 times, then you ease back on the slippery elm. So you play with it. And we've had a few people, by the 3rd day, because everything's going well, they stop all their anti-inflammatories. Now, if they started to go 10 times when they stop their anti-inflammatories, there's 2 things you can do. Just increase the slippery elm or go back on half-dose anti-inflammatories, so you play with it. And then one man, he was on 20 milligrams of cortisone. Because everything was settling down, he was able to drop 5 milligrams of cortisone every 2 weeks. And the cortisone that he was told he'd be on for the rest of his life, he's now off. Because he started to give his body the right conditions. There's one up the back, yeah?
Do you usually pick the castor oil whether for liver cleanse or for the colon? Should you use a heating pad on it?
Well, usually your body will heat it up enough, but maybe in the winter you might use a heating pad. Yeah?
Did you put it directly in the belly button?
Yep. Yep.
You could do that rather than the cloth?
Oh, you mean just put it on? The problem with rubbing it in is it's so sticky that it'll oil all your clothes. Now, if you've got time to rub it in, it takes about 10 minutes to rub in. That's why most people will use the pack. And the thicker the pack, the more oil it can hold, then the more oil can go into you.
What's your opinion on colonoscopies?
I would not have a colonoscopy, and I don't advise colonoscopies. The drink that you drink before the colonoscopy just about would give you irritable bowel. It is so caustic and irritating to the lining of the gut.
You were talking about the hydrotherapy for the colon. Do you suggest that like on a regular basis or only if needed?
Only if needed. Yeah. There's a question here, I'll repeat it, yeah?
How about colon cancer?
What about colon cancer? Well, depends on a few things. If the colon cancer is near the colon, you know, that's called the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon. If it's just here, the person can do an enema of sodium bicarbonate and water. Because remember, Dr. Tullio Simoncini, he would inject the sodium bicarbonate straight into the cancer. But if the colon has cancer there, you can put an enema once a day of sodium bicarbonate there. And also apply castor oil compresses. And also you would gauge if the person with colon cancer has got diarrhea, then you put them on the slippery elm. If they're only going once every 2 days, then you might make that chia seed drink that it'll encourage them to go every day. So again, you're looking for body's response is your guide. The body's response tells you what to do. You've got to listen.
When you're getting a good response, how do you know how long to maintain that regimen that gave it to you before you start to wean off of something?
Well, I guess you'd stop the treatments and see what the body says.
And cold turkey stop versus cutting down the amount of time you use, or?
Yeah, you could just stop and you think, oh, no, I was better off on that. So you know, it's like the hemorrhoids, they've gone. But you don't go back on the old diet, although the hemorrhoids will come back. So you've also got to address what the cause was.
So when you said about the paracyclones, if you have animals that sleep in your bed, so my animals sleep in my bed and that's never going to change. Do I take black walnut and wormwood forever?
Yeah, forever.
I'm just taking them forever.
Yeah. Okay, so it's time to close. Oh, we've got one more question, yeah?
So if your protein enzymes are all out of whack, if your protein enzymes are all out of whack, some are too high, some are too low, not in the normal range, is everything you just said today pretty much follow that?
Yeah,
Or is
and
it
by the way, how do you know they're out of range?
blood test?
Yeah, I just don't have the blood test.
I hear that, but we're trying to find the cause of amnesia episodes, and after 2 years of them saying it was stress related, which now I might believe, that was the only thing we could
And
find.
remember, stress greatly affects the gut. And so getting the gut back into working order so that it does break down your proteins effectively, because when people are under high stress, it's not unusual that they're not accessing their protein because the digestion of the protein is so greatly diminished. So again, it's addressing the cause, looking at the reason why that is so. So thank you for your attention. It's time to go home to bed. And tomorrow morning we're going to be looking at hormones, and then the second lecture will be heart. That's the 3 o'clock lecture, and the evening lecture will be diabetes, how to conquer diabetes.